Were it possible to travel in time and space, we would see the events and dreams that torment nations and people. We could pinpoint where their identities and civilizations come from. In order to investigate the dilemmas of legends and dreams where a nation, a culture, and a civilization is conceived, we must explore their birthplace. Situated in a peninsula where it looks like nature is cradling the city in its lap, Butrint speaks its own language, magical in its landscape and mysterious in its history and events.
Everyone needs legends, and Butrint is full of them. The city here was founded by mythical association with the Trojans, the refugees who fled the destruction of Troy by the Greeks. The earliest archaeologists who came to work at Butrint came to find those Trojans. They came to find their footsteps. And the area behind me is the first part of the city they began to work. How true are those legends? Were the early inhabitants of Butrint really Trojans? Well, it's difficult to say, and archaeology doesn't really speak about these things. Certainly, the legend had very, very deep roots in this area and in the rest of the Mediterranean. And indeed, in the Roman period, under the Emperor Augustus, the great poet Virgil produced a major poem about the travellings and wanderings of Aeneas that became the mythical foundations, not just for Butrint, but for the whole Roman world itself.
I saw before me Troy in miniature, a slender copy of our massive tower, a dry brooklet named Xanthus, and I pressed my body against a Scaean gate.
Virgil speaks about the city as if it were the new Troy.
The city's foundation legend has either Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, or Helenus, the son of King Priam, sailing along the coastline of Epirus and trying to sacrifice a bull on his ship. The bull escaped, and where it swam ashore and died, that's where the city was founded. But the man who really counted in this story was Aeneas, the refugee Trojan. Virgil writes about him in his great poem. Aeneas came here with a little group of refugees and found an already existing Trojan colony under the rulership of King Helenus. It was one of those places where Aeneas was presented with a choice. His destiny lay before him. He could stay or he could leave, and he chose to leave and found the Roman race across the Adriatic in Italy.
The history of Butrint is often a reality mixed in legends. As told by Virgil, life in the city began around 1150 BC, but its first inhabitants settled there a long time before Butrint became the famed city. They were attracted by the great variety of food sources in the area. They built a settlement in the small idyllic hill with a very rich habitat. Enclosed by a stone wall and without any contact with the Greek world, the first inhabitants of Butrint could not have known whether Troy or Homer existed. The village continued this isolated life until the 7th century BC, when the Corinthian colony of Corcyra was founded on the island across its shores. Shortly after, around 750 BC, a group of the Hellenic colonizers settled in Butrint to create a kind of barter market to serve the needs of the mainland inhabitants, the Chaonians, which later were called Epirotes. The colonizers' period was marked by simultaneous peaceful and warring periods. This is clearly visible from the various archaeological layers and from the type of construction and fortification in the hill across, the Kalivos Hill. Around 520 BC, the conflict between Chaonians and the Greek Korkyras inhabitants of Butrint worsened, and this led to the need to build a wall that would completely separate the city from the Chaonian mainland.
Well, archaeologists have been looking for Edeas for many, many years. The first people to excavate here undertook excavations to try and find his very footsteps. What did they actually find? Well, walls like this one here, these great pieces of polygonal masonry, which look so old, and yet are in fact a lot more recent than the time of Aeneas. There is actually very little evidence that Aeneas ever really came here. There are a few coins that the city minted later on when it became a self-governing city. It produced a whole series of coins with elements of its legends built into them. It was very proud of the association with the Trojans, with Aeneas. The actual city itself seems to have been founded on the Acropolis Hill, the highest point of Butrint, and there archaeology has found a certain amount of evidence for material, a small settlement, a small fortification with walls a lot smaller than this, probably dating to the 8th century BC. So we're looking back to the late Neolithic, to the Bronze Age. This will be the time when Butrint was actually founded. The Trojan legend came later, and yet, is there smoke without fire? For some reason, Butrint was cashing in. It was trying to make credit out of its association with Troy and the Trojans.
Oh, my Butrint, we are both older than anyone remembers. You, thousands of years old. The gods, older than you. And I, older than the gods.
It would be a mistake to neglect the city foundation legend. We need it to understand the birth of the city. It is like the city has one birth, but many legends about this birth. This makes us believe that history has been so kind to the city. Its birth takes the form of divine legends.
Getting into Butrint in the past was not exactly easy. The Vivari Channel prevented you from coming here by road, except across the single bridge that existed leading you into the city centre. Walls existed all the way along the channel side, defensive circuits from the Hellenistic period all the way into the Middle Ages. This gate is one of the main gates of the city. It lies right by the main road across the channel, and it's a medieval gateway as it exists at the moment. But it must have been in use for many, many centuries, with people coming in and out of the city, and all sorts of different construction styles can be seen here. It's also defensive. You'll see at the top that there are crenellations, so that a fighting platform could be manned in case enemies or invaders appeared with their boats or tried to cross the bridge from the plain on the far side.
Oh, we were very fortunate to enjoy a bounty of resources and a bounty of legends, and to never lose our pride for this small city that we inherited from our forefathers. But in order to defend the peace of this city, that we called the City of Sun and Water, we built many walls and gates. Not because we were afraid. We never wanted war. But there is no history without it.
Ky vend ka i bukur nuk mund të mos ishte i mbushur me legjenda në kohën antike. Përballë është kodra e Trojës, që lidhesh me kujtimin e ardhjes trojanëve sipas legjendës. Prapa është porta e quajtur Skea nga Ugolini, e ruajtur plotësisht si në antikitet, ku sipas legjendës futet Enea dhe gjen brenda Andromakën, vënë e Hektorit, që ishte martuar me vllajën e Hektorit, Helenin, sipas një zakoni që kujton atë të malësorëve tonë përpara 100 vjetësh, por që nga ana tjetër të kujton dhe faktin që ishin gratë që sundonin, se Andromaka, e cila pastaj jep jetë nëpërmjet lindjes së Kaonit edhe dinastisë nga e cila dalin Ajakidët, ata që sundojnë Epirin në kohën historike. Dhe nga ana tjetër, mbi shkrimet e teatrit dëshmojnë qartë, ndryshe nga bota greke, ishin botë ku gruaja luan një rol të veçantë, sepse ishin gratë që kishin drejt trashëgimit pasurive që s'ndodhën në Greqi, ishin gratë që jepnin edhe lejen për lirimin e sklevrëve, që ishte një gjë unike për botën antike. në pirë, në liri, edhe në Maqedoni, në një botë që ishte në veri të botës greke.
This is the famous Lion Gate of Butrint. It's one of the great Hellenistic gateways that line the city walls and was probably constructed in the 3rd or 4th centuries AD, giving access out to the lake waters from the city centre. The thing that makes it famous, of course, is the sculpture of a lion attacking a bull lying on the ground. This is interesting because the bull is the symbol of the city, Buthrotum, the city of the bull. And this symbol of the bull appears on all the coinage of the Chaonian tribe, the local Epirot tribal group who used Butrint as their capital centre and dominated this particular area. They, of course, became known as the Praesebes, a koinon, a state within the greater Epirot League, the Epirot Kingdom.
At the beginning of the 4th century, around 385 BC, the city was invaded by the Molossian kingdom, whose power and influence reached up to this region. It was during this time that the city became better organized as an urban center, with strong walls and several gates and controlled entry and exit points. Nonetheless, Butrint still had a small population at this time, given the exodus of the Greek population and the concentration of the Chaonians.
Every morning was beautiful in this place. We never stopped fishing and hunting for the guests arriving daily. Guests who came full of faith and desire to heal in this sacred place. I don't know how many, hundreds, thousands from all over the world came here, and we, the locals, believed that the gods had blessed us.
Asclepius was a popular god for other reasons as well. He was the centre of the city's social life. Many of the aristocrats and nobles who made up the core of the city's governing body followed Asclepius. They worshipped him. We can see the evidence of this here, on this wall of the theatre. All of these inscriptions in Greek, which was the language which the city used to write official documents, record the ceremonies that were happening in this theatre. The freeing of slaves by their wealthy owners, the freeing of slaves and their absorption into the extended families of the aristocracy of the city itself.
Only a small temple set in the open remained in the lower part of the city, which was separated by a big wall. The temple served as a healing, life-giving, and longevity source, and it was later dedicated to the god of medicine, Asclepius. In the middle of the 3rd century BC, the public space of the city was organized around the temple. The area included the theater and beautiful alleys that meandered from Agora to the Skia Gate. Tritonoi, or Stoa, looked like a promenade, but had an additional useful function. It served as a hotel for the many pilgrims that came to be healed of various diseases through the life-giving Butrint Creek. The center became very important when it started to serve the population concentrated in the Vrina Valley, which bordered the lake, at the time called Peloda, the Miles Mountain, and the sea, ending in the border area with Thesprotians. The city now had taken shape. It was a detailed, richly organized settlement. From the many inscriptions left on the Butrint walls, we read about life of a rich city living in harmony, a city that was founded and operated on the principles of kindness, forgiveness, and respect for the less fortunate. Philanthropy, art, and very sophisticated buildings for its time make Butrint an important city in the region.
This is the theatre of Butrint. It's the very, very heart of the ancient township. The theatre here is attached to the shrine of Asclepius, the healing god. Asclepius was a physician so skilled that Zeus himself became jealous because he could raise the dead, and he slew him in a fit of anger. There are many sanctuaries of Asclepius all around the Mediterranean. He was, for obvious reasons, a very popular god. He healed the sick. People could go to him. A payment of a small amount of money would allow you into the secret rites of the priests, would allow you to stay the night in the temple precincts and be visited by Asclepius in a dream, who hopefully would cure the ailment you actually had. This is the very, very heart of the city, and the connection with Asclepius has a good reason. Butrint is a city which is very much involved with water, fresh water, spring water, which collected in the caves and crannies of the rock of the Acropolis Hill. This water was used by mariners, by sailors, who stopped here to pick up water on their voyages along the coast. It was also fresh and healthy. People came here to drink it, and that's how the shrine started.
Oh, dear Butrint, those were the times. How much joy I felt in your theater, not only during shows, celebrations, or slave liberation ceremonies, but I can't forget that here, the rich merchants bought goods for more than face value and donated the difference to be used for the good of the city.
Asclepius was a healing god, a god of life, and so it was appropriate that this theatre was one of the scenes for a great ceremony of rebirth, the freeing of slaves, the freeing of an underclass, and bringing them into a wider community. The people of Butrint came here to observe these ceremonies, and they left us a great document in the form of inscriptions that cover the walls of the theatre. The inscriptions tell us about the slaves who were freed here, adopted into their families. If you were under the control of a good master or good mistress, it is likely that you would have found yourself being freed and adopted into the wider family and becoming effectively a member of the citizen body of the town.
Ky vend teatri sintetizon pjesën më të bukur të historisë së Prasaibëve, të qendrës së Butrotasve antik. U krijuar në vendin e faltorës vjetër të Asklepit, në mesin e shekullit të tretë, me njëherë pas fitoreve të mëdha të Piros në Italinë e Jugut, që sollën pasuri në këtë pjesë të Epirit. Tu ku luajt drama e Butrotasve kur humbën lirin pastaj në vitin 44 me një vendim Cezarit që donte t'i shpronsonte, me letrat që i dërgonin Pomponatikut, ishte një vilë jo shumë larg nga ky vend, dhe me ndërhyrjet e Ciceronit famshëm, që e lejuan këtë liri të zgjatet deri në rreth vitit 30, kur Augusti mori vendimin përfundimtar për vendosjen e kolonisë romake.
The Romans brought with them their construction technique and aesthetic. They built in Butrint some of their most magnificent works in the Mediterranean. The aqueduct, Roman baths, and beautiful harbors demonstrate that the city had the highest level of urban organization. At this point in time, Butrint is without any doubt a sophisticated urban center and an active decision-making population.
Vërëzimi vërtet I Butrintit është shekulli II të erës sonë, kur perandori Adrian I jep mësinë të ndërtohet një urë përmes kanalit, do I sjellë si ndërtuar që në kohën e Augustit futet brenda në Butrint, romakët kthehen në Butrint, rindërtojnë skenën e teatrit, ndërtojnë tempuj edhe veçanërisht termet, që ishin shenja kryesore e qytetërimit romak.
They brought with them their civilization, and here I am standing in one piece of evidence of that civilization. One of the most typical Roman things you can see, a bathhouse. Used for social intercourse as much as cleaning yourself, engaging in gossip. The bathhouse was an extraordinary Roman institution, a series of rooms that went from cold to hot. And this is one of the hot rooms, where warm air would be drawn from the fires and the furnaces under the floor to vent out at roof level. And here you would come to sweat away the dirt from your pores and also to have a word with your neighbor.
Por ajo që krijon romantizmin natyrisht ishin në thet, si ky që kemi në krahun ton, ku në nishet e tij ishin vendosur skulptura, njërin prej cilave pati fat Ugolinit agjente dhe ishte Dionisi I famshëm, prej mermeri që ruhet sot në muze.
Butrint was a very crowded cityscape, and even though lots of later additions have been made, the citizens decided that they must leave the major gate of the city intact. And all through its subsequent history, getting into Butrint was a problem, because not only did you have to come over a bridge and wind your way past the baths and the aqueduct, you also had to find your way through the great Hellenistic Tower Gate. The remains of it must have been an extraordinary sight, standing here, these huge stone blocks, just like parts of the city walls, nevertheless still forming, even in the early medieval period, the main entranceway for the road into Butrint. The city, as well as having other public monuments, must have an administration. It needs a government. And we're standing here in this new excavation right over the top of that point of civic government. Here we can see the remains of both the agora of the city of the time of the Chaonians and also the forum that was inserted, that was built for the incoming Roman colonists. Right at my feet, underneath the water, which is the natural water level of Butrint today, you can see the fine marble pavement and the colonnade which would have gone around the Forum Square. And it's here that the public administration would have happened. This is where the magistrates would have had their offices. This is where the people would have met to decide upon the business of the city. Well, where did people live in Butrint? For the poorest, it would have been 1 or 2 rooms off of side street, perhaps in the docks or near the Forum. For the richest, however, it was a different story entirely. And we're standing here in one of the largest and grandest houses of ancient Butrint. This is the Triconch Palace. In essence, it's a villa constructed right by the water's edge so that it gets advantage of all the fresh breezes coming off the water in the evening. And it's here that the owner, who we know was a man of considerable wealth and rank, would have invited his friends to great dinner parties and soirees to show off his wealth, to show off his power and position. They wouldn't have arrived by road. They would have come in boats, their specially constructed barges, which would have brought them along the channel from their own villas and grand houses around the periphery of Butrint, arriving through their own entranceway here and into the central courtyard of the palace behind me. And then in the evening, they would have all assembled together in the great Triconch dining room to be entertained by the owner, to engage in grand social rituals which showed off their power to each other.
During the Byzantine period, Butrint loses importance and it is forgotten by history. But this might have been a blessing in disguise, as contrary to many cities which lost territory or were abandoned, Butrint doubled its population and territory. In the late Byzantine period, it was also impressive in Butrint, and this can be seen on the various high qualities of ceramics and artifacts, in the building style and their magnificent city towers. Based on its heritage and prestige, Butrint had created a traditional respect on religion and its institutions, and this can be seen in the numerous basilicas and Christian churches.
Well, Rome eventually became a Christian empire, and the temples were replaced by churches. There were a whole series of churches here in Butrint, most of them built from the 5th century AD onwards into the Middle Ages. This one here is the biggest of them all, the Great Basilica. It's the only one that still remains standing all the way to roof height. It was constructed probably at the end of the 5th century AD. It's not the bishop's church. That was elsewhere. This is a church built by a very wealthy patron, a citizen of the city who had come into money. He was probably a member of the city council, and he wanted to express his public munificence, his civic ideality, and by doing that, he constructed a church. This is absolutely typical of the later Roman world and the world of the early Byzantine Empire. People no longer spent money on theatres, they no longer spent money on temples, they spent it on churches. And here at Butrint, we have one of the finest examples to be seen in this whole region. In a Christian world, you need places for people to be baptized. And this monument, the Baptistry of Butrint, is the most significant monument, single monument, in the whole city. built probably in the 6th century AD, is designed to baptize as many people as possible into the Christian cult. In the 6th century, at this early date, you had to have a bishop to undertake baptism. You could not undertake it in a normal church. It needed to be in a specific building. And here amongst these broken and ruined columns lies the font right in the center into which the new entrants into the Christian cult would step to be baptized by the bishop and his priests. It would have been a grand occasion. It could only happen on Easter Sunday. And on that time, when dawn struck, the light coming over the rooftops of the city, a great procession would come here. The clergy, the bishop would separate out, and everybody else would wait seated on the benches around the walls for their turn to be called up to be baptized into the Christian faith.
Bazilika e Madhe, ky monument që fikson dy nga rilindjet e Butrintit, një në shekullin e 6, mbi rrënojat e qytetërimit romak, është ngritur me një terme të shekullit të 2 të erëson ndërtuar në kohën e Adrianit, dhe së bashku me baptisterin ftonte besimtarët tek një fe e re që ishte kristianizmi, po dhe një qëndres ndaj rrënimit, ndaj shkatërimit i kishin shkaktuar dyndjet, veçanërisht dyndjet slave të shekullit 6. Rilind komuniteti, një komunitet që lidhet tani me arbërit e hershëm të mesjetës, me shqiptarët e parë. Dhe pastaj, në shekullin e 9, rivendosja e administratës bizantine me temën e Nikopolit, që nuk ishte larg prej këtu, në artën e sotme, dhe rilindjen e një popullsie që është popullsia arbëreshe ose popullsia çame, pastaj që dëshmohet edhe në dokumentat e shekullit 13-14.
Medieval Butrint was a grand city that continued to have an inherited splendor from the Byzantine period, but Butrint became the battlefield of fighting in the Mediterranean battles, and in the 14th century came under control of the Venetians. The main importance of Butrint for the Venetians was the strategic advantage of having an outpost on the mainland and the financial value of the fisheries, and it seems clear from the construction of 4 observation towers and the triangular fortress.
The last centuries of Butrint were very different from the history of the city that had gone before. In the Middle Ages, Butrint became embroiled with a whole series of wars, and then finally, under the Venetians, it became involved in a major conflict with the rising power of the Ottoman Turks. By 1572, the Venetian captain of Corfu, the governor of this area, decided that the administration needed to be shifted. A new centre of Butrint, New Butrint, was founded on the other side of the channel, the triangular fortress, and it worked together with the tower behind me, this great blockhouse, the two protecting the most important economic part of Butrint, the fish trap, the fish weir, which was the major economic resource of Butrint at that time. It's also the place where the very last stage of Butrint's history was played out, because here, in this castle, across the other side of the channel, in 1819, Ali Pasha of Tepelena came to Butrint to sign a peace treaty with the British governor of Corfu to resolve all the problems and issues surrounding Butrint and the diplomatic relations between the Ottoman Empire and Britain that had come as a result of the Napoleonic Wars. Butrint passed into the hands of the Ottoman Empire and effectively disappeared from history.
Butrint is a strong link in the Mediterranean civilization. 3,500 years old, the city stands tall, calm, noble, and stubborn. It awakes one's curiosity and makes one want to cry in its language, talk. But there, history has put its mystery veil, covered with a breathtaking landscape where the only sound is the birds chirping that we would say define the laws of nature and are still alive from the moment of the arrival of Aeneas.